In the misty village of St. Mary's Mead, a poet lies dead, his quill dripping with deadly poison. Was it the critic, stung by humiliation, the rival, burning with ambition, or the publisher, greedy for profit? Join Hercule Poirot as he unravels a web of pride and vengeance where every clue points to a killer hiding in plain sight. In the Crimson Quill, one stroke of genius reveals the truth, or seals a deadly fate. Chapter 1. The death of a poet. The mist hung low over St. Mary's Mead, cloaking the village in a ghostly veil as the autumn sun dipped below the horizon. Willow Grange, the grand estate of the poet Lionel Ashby, stood at the edge of the village, its ivy-clad walls looming like a sentinel in the twilight. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and wax polish, but a darker presence had settled over the house that evening, a presence of death. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with his impeccable moustache and twinkling eyes, had not intended to find himself embroiled in a mystery. He had come to St. Mary's Mead to enjoy a few days of quiet with his friend, Captain Arthur Hastings, whose cottage offered a respite from the clamour of London. Yet, as Poirot often remarked, the little grey cells, they do not take holidays. And so it was that on this chilly October evening, a breathless constable arrived at Hastings' doorstep with news that would shatter the village's tranquillity. "Monsieur Poirot," the young officer stammered, his face pale under his helmet. "It's Mr. Ashby, Lionel Ashby, the poet. He's been found dead, sir, in his study at Willow Grange. Dr. Haydock says it's no natural death. Will you come?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, his curiosity piqued. "Dead, you say? And not by nature's hand? Très intéressant. Lead on, mon ami." Hastings, ever eager for adventure, grabbed his coat, and the trio set off through the misty lanes. Willow Grange was a 10-minute walk, its wrought-iron gates creaking as they entered the gravel drive. The house, with its tall windows and gabled roof, seemed to watch them approach, as if guarding its secrets. Inside, the housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, a stout woman with trembling hands, led them to the study. The room was a poet's sanctuary. Shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a fireplace casting flickering shadows, and a heavy oak desk strewn with papers. At its centre lay Lionel Ashby, his head resting on a blotter, his right hand clutching a quill. His face, contorted in a rictus of pain, bore the unmistakable signs of a violent end. The quill, its nib glistening with crimson ink, seemed an incongruous detail in the grim tableau. Dr. Haydock, a grizzled physician with a no-nonsense demeanour, stood by the body. "Poison, I'd wager," he said, glancing at Poirot. "There's no wound, no sign of a struggle. But look at his fingers. Blue at the tips, and that grimace. I've seen it before, with aconite. Deadly stuff. Acts fast." Poirot knelt beside the desk, his movements precise, almost delicate. He examined the quill, holding it up to the lamplight. The crimson stain was not merely ink, he noted. There was a faint, acrid smell, a hint of something sinister. "This quill," he murmured, "it is no ordinary tool of the poet's trade. It has been turned into an instrument of death." Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, frowned. "Poisoned? But how? He was writing, wasn't he?" "Précisément," Poirot replied, his voice low. "The poison, it was delivered through the quill. A scratch, perhaps, or prolonged contact with the skin. The method, it is both ingenious and cruel." Poirot's gaze swept the room. A half-finished sonnet lay on the desk, its lines elegant but incomplete, as if Ashby had been interrupted mid-thought. A glass of port sat untouched, its surface undisturbed. The windows were latched, the door unforced. Whoever had orchestrated this crime had done so with care, leaving no obvious trace. "Tell me, Doctor," Poirot said, turning to Haydock, "when was Monsieur Ashby last seen alive?" "Mrs. Finch found him about an hour ago, just after 6, Haydock replied. "She says he was working here all afternoon. No one heard a thing. No cries, no commotion." Poirot nodded, his mind already sifting through possibilities. "And who was in the house today?" Mrs. Finch, hovering nervously, spoke up. "Just the staff, sir, and a few visitors. Mr. Crane, the critic, came by last night. Miss Vane, the poetess, was here yesterday afternoon, and Mr. Blackwood, the publisher, stopped in this morning." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as the stirring of his friend's formidable intellect. 3 visitors, 3 motives, perhaps, Poirot said softly. A critic, a rival, a publisher, each with their own reasons to wish harm upon a poet. He turned to Hastings, his eyes alight with purpose. "Mon cher Hastings, this is a puzzle most intriguing. The quill, it is not just a weapon. It is a message. Someone wished not only to kill Lionel Ashby, but to do so in a manner that speaks of his art. We must find this person, and quickly, before the trail grows cold." As the constable covered Ashby's body with a sheet, Poirot stood back, his hands clasped behind him, his mind already weaving a tapestry of clues and suspicions. The Crimson Quill, he knew, held the key to unravelling this poetic tragedy. Chapter 2. The Suspects Assemble. The drawing-room of Willow Grange was a study in contrasts, opulent yet sombre, its high ceilings and velvet drapes casting an air of grandeur over the grim proceedings within. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing fleeting shadows across the faces of those gathered, each betraying a flicker of unease. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre, his diminutive figure commanding the room with an authority that belied his stature. His polished shoes gleamed, his moustache was immaculate, and his eyes, those sharp green-grey eyes, missed nothing. Beside him, Captain Hastings fidgeted, his honest face creased with concern as he surveyed the assembly. The death of Lionel Ashby, the poet whose quill had become his undoing, hung over them like a storm cloud. Poirot had insisted on gathering everyone who had been at Willow Grange in the hours leading up to Ashby's death. The local police, led by the earnest but outmatched Inspector Grayson, had agreed to his request, recognizing that this was no ordinary case. The poisoned quill, laced with aconite, was a weapon both precise and theatrical, suggesting a mind that was as cunning as it was vengeful. Poirot's task was to unmask that mind, and he began, as always, with the people closest to the crime. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice soft yet carrying the weight of command, "we are here to discuss the tragic demise of Monsieur Lionel Ashby. He was found dead in his study, poisoned by the very quill he used to craft his poetry. This is not an accident, none, but a murder most deliberate. I, Hercule Poirot, will uncover the truth, but I require your cooperation. Each of you was in contact with the victim recently. Each of you, therefore, is a suspect." A murmur rippled through the room. Hastings noted the varied reactions: indignation, fear, and, in one case, a curious calm. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the group. "Let us proceed with order and method. I will speak with each of you, and we shall establish where you were, what you did, and what you know of Monsieur Ashby's final hours." The suspects were three, each a distinct figure in the literary world that had orbited Ashby's star. First was Mr. Reginald Crane, a critic whose barbed reviews were as feared as they were read. His lean frame was clad in a severe black suit, his thin lips pursed as if tasting something bitter. His eyes, sharp and restless, darted about the room, avoiding Poirot's gaze. Next was Miss Clara Vane, a poet whose rising talent had been eclipsed by Ashby's fame. Her auburn hair was swept into a loose bun, and her expressive face betrayed a mix of defiance and sorrow. Finally, there was Mr. Percival Blackwood, Ashby's publisher, a portly man whose florid cheeks and nervous gestures suggested a discomfort beyond mere grief. His tailored waistcoat strained slightly at the buttons, and his hands toyed ceaselessly with a gold watch chain. Poirot began with Reginald Crane, gesturing for him to remain, while the others were ushered to the library to wait. The critic sat stiffly, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. "Monsieur Crane," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild, "you are a man of words, are you not? Your reviews in the Literary Gazette have shaped many a career. Tell me, what was your relationship with Monsieur Ashby?" Crane's lip curled. Relationship? There was none. I reviewed his work, as I do many others. He was a poet of some repute, but his talent was overstated. His verses lacked originality. His metaphors were pedestrian. I said as much in my column 2 years ago. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as the detective's mind latching onto a detail. And this review, it was not well received by Monsieur Ashby, I presume. I have heard it cost him a significant prize, the Laurel Award, non? Crane's eyes flickered with something akin to satisfaction. It did. The judges saw sense after my article. Ashby was furious, of course. He wrote me a scathing letter, accusing me of bias. But I stand by my words. And yet, Poirot continued, leaning forward slightly, you visited him here, at Willow Grange, only last night. Was this to mend fences, or to fan the flames of discord? Crane shifted uncomfortably. I came to discuss a new anthology. Ashby was to contribute a poem, and I was to write the foreword. We had a drink, exchanged a few words, and I left. That was all. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A few words, you say. Were they amicable? Crane hesitated, his fingers tightening on the chair. Not entirely. He was still bitter about the review. He made some cutting remarks about my own writing. But it was nothing out of the ordinary. I left him alive, if that's what you're implying. And where did you go after leaving Willow Grange? Poirot asked, his voice like velvet over steel. To the Red Lion Inn, Crane replied quickly. I had a whiskey with the locals. Ask the barmaid, she'll tell you. Poirot nodded, dismissing Crane with a wave. We shall verify, monsieur. For now, you may wait with the others. As Crane exited, Hastings whispered, He's a cold fish, Poirot. That grudge of his, it's motive enough, isn't it? Perhaps, Poirot replied, but motive alone is not enough. We must have proof, and the method. It is too personal for mere professional rivalry. Let us see what Mademoiselle Vane has to say. Clara Vane entered, her posture erect, her eyes blazing with a mix of pride and defiance. She was younger than Ashby, perhaps in her early 30s, and her presence filled the room with an almost palpable intensity. Her dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair, was simple yet elegant, a poet's attire rather than a socialite's. Mademoiselle Vane, Poirot began, offering her a seat, you are a poet of considerable talent, I am told. Yet Monsieur Ashby's shadow loomed large over your career. Tell me, how did you feel about him?" Clara's lips tightened. Lionel Ashby was a gifted poet, but he was also a vain man who guarded his fame jealously. I admired his early work, but his later poems were safe. They lacked the fire of true innovation. My own work, on the other hand—" She paused, as if catching herself. "Your work is bold, revolutionary, Poirot prompted, his tone encouraging. "Yes," Clara said, her voice firm. "I was nominated for the Laurel Award 2 years ago, the same year Ashby was. His name carried more weight, but after Crane's review, he lost the prize. I thought it might be my chance, but the judges chose another. Ashby never let me forget it. He called my work juvenile during a literary salon last month." Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was sharp. "And this wounded you, mademoiselle?" "Enough to confront him?" Clara met his gaze unflinchingly. "I did confront him. Yesterday afternoon, I came to Willow Grange to discuss a joint reading we were to give in London. He was insufferable, mocking my latest collection. We argued, I admit, but I left by 4 o'clock. He was alive when I departed." "And where did you go?" Poirot asked. "Home," Clara said. "I live at Rose Cottage, just across the meadow. My maid, Ellen, can confirm I was there all evening." Poirot made a mental note, his fingers tapping lightly on his knee. "Your passion for your art, it is admirable, mademoiselle, but passion can lead to dark places, can it not?" Clara's eyes flashed. "If you're suggesting I poisoned him, you're mistaken. I fight my battles with words, not weapons." Poirot inclined his head. "We shall see. Thank you, Mademoiselle Vane. Please send in Monsieur Blackwood." As Clara left, Hastings leaned in. "She's fiery, Poirot. That argument could have pushed her too far." "Oui," Poirot agreed, "but her anger is open, not hidden. The poisoner, I think, is more subtle. Let us hear from the publisher." Percival Blackwood entered, mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief despite the coolness of the room. His round face was flushed, and his eyes darted nervously, as if expecting an accusation at any moment. He settled heavily into the chair, his gold watch chain glinting in the firelight. "Monsieur Blackwood," Poirot said, his voice smooth, "you published Monsieur Ashby's works, did you not? A profitable arrangement, I presume?" Blackwood nodded vigorously. "Very profitable. Ashby's books sold thousands of copies. His name was a guarantee of success. But he was difficult, always demanding higher advances, more control over the editions. We had a disagreement about his next book, but we settled it." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Settled, you say? And yet you were here this morning. Why?" Blackwood's hands twisted the handkerchief. "To deliver a contract for the new book. He signed it, and I left for London on the 11 o'clock train. You can check the ticket." "And your disagreement," Poirot pressed. "It was truly resolved? Or did Monsieur Ashby's demands threaten your profits?" Blackwood's flush deepened. "His death doesn't hurt me, if that's what you mean. His unpublished manuscripts will sell even better now. Posthumous works always do. But I didn't kill him. I was in London when it happened." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "And yet, monsieur, you stand to gain much from his death. A motive most compelling, Blackwood sputtered, but Poirot dismissed him with a gesture. "We shall verify your movements, Monsieur Blackwood. For now, you may join the others." As Blackwood shuffled out, Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression thoughtful. 3 suspects, mon ami, each with a reason to wish Ashby harm. Crane, whose pride was wounded by Ashby's scorn. Vane, whose ambition was thwarted by his success. Blackwood, whose greed may have outweighed his loyalty. But the quill. It is the key. Whoever poisoned it knew Ashby's habits intimately. Hastings frowned. But how did they do it? The quill was in his study, wasn't it? Précisément, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. The study. It is the stage of this crime. Tomorrow we shall examine it more closely. For now, let us consider the characters in this drama. Each has told us something, but also hidden something. The truth, it lies in what they do not say. The fire crackled, and outside the mist thickened, wrapping Willow Grange in a shroud of mystery. Poirot stood, adjusting his coat, his mind already piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The Crimson Quill, with its deadly secret, was more than a weapon. It was a clue to the heart of the killer. And Hercule Poirot was determined to uncover it. Chapter 3. The critic's grudge. The morning sun pierced the mist that clung to St. Mary's Mead, casting a pale light through the tall windows of Willow Grange. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, stood in the drawing-room, his hands clasped behind his back, his moustache perfectly symmetrical. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp leaves and wood smoke, but the atmosphere within the house remained heavy with suspicion. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, stood nearby, his notebook open, ready to jot down any insight Poirot might share. The death of Lionel Ashby, struck down by a poisoned quill, demanded answers, and Poirot was determined to extract them with his characteristic precision. The previous evening's interviews had revealed 3 suspects, each with a motive tied to the poet's life and work. Yet Poirot's mind lingered on Reginald Crane, the critic whose venomous pen had once humiliated Ashby. There was something in Crane's sharp eyes and guarded demeanour that suggested more than mere professional disdain. Poirot had requested Crane join him for a private conversation in the morning room, a smaller, sunlit space adorned with faded tapestries and a single armchair where the critic now sat, his posture rigid. "Monsieur Crane," Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished oak, "you are a man who wields words as a surgeon wields a scalpel. Your reviews cut deeply, do they not? And none cut deeper than the one you wrote of Monsieur Ashby's Odes to Eternity 2 years ago." Crane's thin lips tightened, and his fingers, long and pale, gripped the arms of the chair. "I wrote the truth," he said, his voice clipped. "Ashby's work was overrated, a pastiche of better poets. His rhymes were forced, his imagery derivative. The literary world deserved to know." Poirot's eyes gleamed, catching the faint tremor in Crane's tone. "And yet, monsieur, your truth cost him dearly. The Laurel Award, a prize that would have cemented his legacy, was denied him after your review. He blamed you, no? I have heard he was not a man to forgive such a slight." Crane's gaze flickered to the window, where the bare branches of an oak swayed in the breeze. "He was furious, yes. He sent me a letter, calling me a petty scribbler who envied his talent. He even mocked me at a literary gathering in London, saying I lacked the soul to understand poetry. But I am a professional, Monsieur Poirot. I do not let personal insults cloud my judgment." Poirot tilted his head, studying Crane as one might study a rare manuscript. "And yet, you visited him here, at Willow Grange, the night before his death. You claim it was to discuss an anthology. But was it not also to settle an old score? Tell me, What passed between you?" Crane's jaw tightened, and for a moment he seemed to weigh his words. "We spoke of the anthology, as I said. He was to contribute a poem, and I was to write the foreword. We had a drink, port, from his decanter. He was his usual arrogant self, boasting about his next collection. I made a remark about his past work, and he took offence. Words were exchanged, but nothing more. I left by 9 o'clock. Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his mind at work. Words, you say. Harsh words, perhaps. Did he mention a new poem, one that might have provoked you?" Crane's eyes narrowed. He mentioned no poem. He was too busy crowing about his fame. If you're suggesting I killed him over a few insults, you're mistaken. I was at the Red Lion Inn by 9:30, as I told you. The barmaid, Molly, will confirm it." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "We shall verify, Monsieur Crane. But tell me, this anthology, did it require you to visit Ashby's study? Did you perhaps see his quill, the one with which he wrote his final words?" Crane's fingers stilled, and a faint flush crept up his neck. "I didn't go near his study. We spoke in the parlour. I saw no quill, poisoned or otherwise." "Very well," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "You may go, for now. But reflect, monsieur, on the power of words. They can wound as deeply as any weapon, and sometimes they provoke a response equally deadly." As Crane rose and left, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor, Hastings turned to Poirot. "He's hiding something, isn't he? That business about the anthology sounds too convenient." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes fixed on the doorway through which Crane had departed. "Monsieur Crane is a man of pride, and pride, when wounded, can fester. His alibi, it must be checked. But more importantly, we must learn what passed in that parlour. The quill, it was not poisoned by chance. It was chosen with purpose, by someone who knew Ashby's habits." Hastings frowned. "But why the quill? Why not poison his drink or his food?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Because, Hastings, the quill is a symbol. It is the tool of Ashby's art, his legacy. To poison it is to strike at his very soul. This is a crime of passion, but not of love. No, it is a passion born of resentment, of humiliation, and Monsieur Crane, he knows more of humiliation than he admits." Poirot moved to the window, gazing out at the misty lawn. "We must return to the study, mon ami. The quill, it holds secrets yet to be uncovered. And we must speak again with Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper. She sees more than she says, I think." The two men left the morning room, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpets of Willow Grange. The house, with its creaking beams and shadowed corners, seemed to watch them, as if guarding the truth of Lionel Ashby's death. Poirot's mind, however, was already at work, piecing together the fragments of motive and opportunity, determined to unravel the mystery of the Crimson Quill. Chapter 4. The Rival's Ambition. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Willow Grange, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Hercule Poirot, his small frame erect and his eyes sharp as ever, had requested a private audience with Miss Clara Vane in the conservatory, a glass-walled haven filled with potted ferns and the faint scent of earth. The choice of setting was deliberate. Poirot believed the greenery and open space might loosen the tongue of the fiery poetess, whose ambition had placed her firmly among the suspects in Lionel Ashby's murder. Captain Hastings stood by a wrought-iron table, his expression a mix of curiosity and unease, as Clara Vane entered, her auburn hair catching the light like a flame. Clara's green dress swished softly as she took a seat, her posture defiant yet composed. Her eyes, bright with intelligence, met Poirot's without flinching, though there was a tightness about her mouth that betrayed inner turmoil. Poirot, ever observant, noted the way her fingers clasped and unclasped, a subtle sign of nerves beneath her confident exterior. "Mademoiselle Vannes," Poirot began, his voice smooth and measured, "you are a poet of considerable promise, a star rising in the literary firmament. Yet to rise, one must sometimes eclipse another. Tell me, how did you regard Monsieur Lionel Ashby, whose light shone so brightly?" Clara's lips parted, then closed, as if choosing her words with care. "Lionel Ashby was a master of his craft, Monsieur Poirot, but his time was passing. His early work, Songs of the Dawn, was exquisite, full of passion and originality. But his later poems—" She paused, her gaze drifting to a fern as if seeking inspiration. They were predictable, polished, but lacking soul. He rested on his laurels, content to bask in his fame, while others, like myself, strove to push the boundaries of poetry. Poirot's moustache quivered slightly, a sign of his interest. "And this fame, it was a source of friction between you, no? I understand you were both nominated for the Laurel Award 2 years ago, a prize that might have elevated your name above his." Clara's eyes flashed, a spark of anger igniting. "Yes, we were rivals for the laurel. I poured my heart into my collection. Winds of change. It was bold, experimental, a challenge to the staid conventions Ashby championed. But his name carried weight, and even after Crane's review diminished him, the judges chose another. Neither of us won. Ashby never let me forget it. At every literary event, he would smile, that patronizing smile, and call my work promising, as if I were a child playing at poetry." Poirot leaned forward, his hands folded neatly. "And this wounded your pride, mademoiselle? To be overshadowed by a man whose work you believed inferior." Clara's fingers tightened on the arm of her chair. "It was not about pride, Monsieur Poirot. It was about fairness. I worked tirelessly, while Ashby coasted on his reputation. He mocked my latest collection, Echoes of the Void, during our meeting yesterday. He said it was too abstract, too chaotic for the public to grasp. We argued, I won't deny it, but I did not kill him." Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the faint tremor in her voice. "This argument, it took place here, at Willow Grange, yesterday afternoon. Tell me, what was its nature, and where, precisely, did it occur?" Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the glass ceiling above. "We met in the parlour, not the study. I came to discuss a joint reading we were to give in London next month. I hoped we could set aside our differences, present a united front for the literary society. But Ashby was insufferable. He read a draft of my poem and laughed, calling it hot pretentious. I told him his work was stagnant, that he feared innovation. It grew heated, and I left before I said something I'd regret." "And what time was this, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, his tone deceptively gentle. 3 o'clock, perhaps a little after," Clara replied. "I was home at Rose Cottage by 4. My maid, Ellen, was there, preparing tea. She can confirm it." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing every detail. "And during your visit, did you see Monsieur Ashby's quill? The one he used in his study? The one that delivered the fatal poison?" Clara's brow furrowed. "No, I told you. We were in the parlour. I never went near his study. I know he was particular about his quills. He made them himself, always boasting about their craftsmanship. But I saw nothing of them yesterday. Poirot's expression remained inscrutable. You are a poet, mademoiselle. And poetry. It is an art of passion. Passion can inspire great works, but it can also lead to great folly. Tell me, did your passion for your art ever tempt you to remove the obstacle that was Lionel Ashby? Clara's face flushed, her voice rising. You think I poisoned him because he mocked my work? I'm not so petty, Monsieur Poirot. My poems are my revenge. They will outlive his, and that is enough. I fight with words, not poison. Poirot inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than agreement. Very well, Mademoiselle Vane. For now you may return to the library. But reflect, if you please, on the power of ambition. It can drive one to soar or to fall. As Clara rose and swept out of the conservatory, her footsteps echoing with purpose, Hastings turned to Poirot. She's got fire, Poirot. That argument sounds like it could have pushed her to the edge. Do you think she's telling the truth? Poirot's eyes gleamed as he adjusted his cufflinks. Mademoiselle Vane is truthful, but not entirely open, mon ami. Her ambition burns brightly, but her anger, it is too direct, too visible. The poisoner, I think, is more subtle, more calculated. Yet her alibi must be checked. This maid, Ellen, we shall speak with her. Hastings scribbled a note. And the quill. She claims she never saw it. Do you believe her? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The quill, it is the heart of this mystery. Whoever poisoned it knew Ashby's habits, knew he would use it, knew it would be his undoing. Mademoiselle Vane may not have entered the study, but her proximity to Willow Grange, her cottage just across the meadow, it is convenient, non? He paused, his gaze drifting to the ferns, their fronds swaying gently in the draught. We must learn more of this argument in the parlour. What was said, what was felt, and we must examine the study again, for the quill was not poisoned by chance. It was a choice, a statement. The killer wished to strike at Ashby's very essence, his poetry. Hastings frowned. But if Clara didn't go to the study, how could she have tampered with the quill? Précisément, Poirot said, his voice low. That is the question we must answer. For now, let us prepare to speak with Monsieur Blackwood, the publisher. His greed, it may reveal another piece of this puzzle. And then, mon ami, we return to the scene of the crime. The conservatory fell silent, save for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant chime of a clock. Outside, the mist was lifting, but the mystery of the Crimson Quill remained as opaque as ever. Poirot, his mind a whirl of possibilities, was determined to pierce its veil, one suspect at a time. Chapter 5. The Publisher's Profit. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Willow Grange, its rays filtering through the heavy drapes of the library, where Hercule Poirot had chosen to conduct his next interview. The room, lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes, exuded an air of quiet authority, much like the detective himself. Poirot stood by a tall bookcase, his small, meticulous figure a stark contrast to the towering tomes behind him. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, were fixed on the door as Mr. Percival Blackwood entered, his portly frame filling the space with a nervous energy. Captain Hastings, seated at a nearby table, noted the publisher's flushed cheeks and the way his hands fidgeted with the gold watch chain dangling from his waistcoat. Blackwood's arrival was marked by a slight stumble, as if the weight of suspicion had unsteadied his step. He settled heavily into an armchair, mopping his brow with a silk handkerchief, despite the coolness of the room. Poirot, ever the master of atmosphere, allowed a moment of silence to stretch, letting Blackwood's discomfort simmer before speaking. "Monsieur Blackwood," Poirot began, his voice smooth as a well-tuned violin, "you are a man of business, a publisher who has profited greatly from the genius of Monsieur Lionel Ashby. His poems, they have filled your coffers, non? Yet I sense that all was not well between you. Tell me, what was the nature of your relationship with the poet?" Blackwood's eyes darted to the side, and he cleared his throat, his voice carrying a forced joviality. "Ashby was a gold mine, Monsieur Poirot. His books, Songs of the Dawn, Whispers of the Muse, sold thousands of copies. Every bookshop from London to Edinburgh clamoured for them. But he was demanding, always pushing for higher advances, more control over the printing, even the cover designs. It made things difficult. But we managed." Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign that he had caught a thread worth pulling. "Difficult, you say? And yet you visited Willow Grange this very morning to deliver a contract for his next book. A contract, I presume, that was signed?" Blackwood nodded vigorously, producing a folded document from his pocket. "Here it is, signed and sealed. We'd had a disagreement about the terms. Ashby wanted a larger advance than I could justify. But we settled it yesterday. I came this morning to finalize things. He was in good spirits, eager to start his new collection." Poirot took the contract, his gloved fingers handling it with care. His eyes scanned the page, noting the date and Ashby's florid signature. "And this disagreement, it was resolved amicably? Or did it leave a bitterness between you?" Blackwood's flush deepened, and his handkerchief made another pass across his brow. "There was no bitterness, Monsieur Poirot. Business is business. Ashby drove a hard bargain, but I agreed to his terms. His death, if anything, is a loss to me. His next book would have been a sensation." Poirot's gaze sharpened, like a hawk spotting movement in the grass. "A loss, you say? And yet, Monsieur Blackwood, the death of a poet often increases the value of his work. Posthumous editions they sell, do they not? Especially unpublished manuscripts, which I understand Monsieur Ashby left in abundance." Blackwood's hands stilled, and for a moment his jovial mask slipped, revealing a flicker of calculation. "Well, yes, that's true," he admitted, his voice lower. "His unpublished works will fetch a high price now. Collectors love a tragedy, and readers will clamour for his final words. But I'd rather have him alive, Monsieur Poirot. A living poet produces more books." Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "And where were you, monsieur, when Monsieur Ashby met his end? I understand you took the 11 o'clock train to London, but what of the hours before?" Blackwood straightened, regaining some composure. "I arrived here at 10, delivered the contract, and left by 10:30. Ashby was in his study, scribbling away as usual. I caught the train, and was in my London office by noon. My clerk, Mr. Thompson, can confirm it, and I have the ticket stub if you need it." Poirot's eyes lingered on Blackwood, noting the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Very well, monsieur. And during your visit, did you see the quill? The one with which Monsieur Ashby wrote his final words? The one that was poisoned with aconite?" Blackwood's eyes widened, and he shook his head emphatically. No, I didn't go near his desk. We spoke briefly in the study, but I stayed by the door. He was particular about his quills, always crafting them himself. I wouldn't touch them." Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the contract, a rhythmic motion that seemed to unsettle Blackwood further. "You stand to gain much from Monsieur Ashby's death, monsieur. A motive of greed. It is as old as time itself. Tell me, did you ever resent his demands, his insistence on higher advances? Did you ever wish to be free of his control?" Blackwood's face reddened, and his voice rose in protest. "Resent him? Of course not. He was my star author. I needed him alive, Monsieur Poirot, not dead. If you're accusing me, you're barking up the wrong tree." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming yet authoritative. "I accuse no one, monsieur. Not yet. But the truth, it has a way of revealing itself. You may return to the others, but I will have more questions in time." As Blackwood lumbered out, his handkerchief now a crumpled mess, Hastings turned to Poirot, his brow furrowed. "He's nervous, Poirot. That talk of profits, it's suspicious, isn't it? He could have poisoned the quill to cash in on Ashby's death." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes fixed on the contract. "Monsieur Blackwood's greed is evident, but is it enough to drive him to murder? The quill, it was not poisoned on a whim. It required knowledge of Ashby's habits, access to his study, and a mind both cunning and patient. We must verify his alibi, this train to London, and we must learn more of this contract, when it was drafted, and what it truly meant to both men." Hastings scribbled a note, his pen scratching against the paper. "Do you think he's lying about not going near the desk?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Lying, perhaps not, but omitting, certainement. Each of our suspects tells a story, Hastings, but none tells the whole story. The quill, it was chosen for a reason, not just to kill, but to send a message. We must return to the study, and we must speak again with Mrs. Finch. She knows the rhythms of this house, and she may have seen more than she realizes." The library fell silent, save for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting the grounds of Willow Grange in a deepening amber light. Poirot folded the contract and tucked it into his pocket, his mind already weaving the threads of motive, opportunity, and method into a tapestry of suspicion. The Crimson Quill, with its deadly secret, was a puzzle that demanded solving, and Hercule Poirot was determined to find its heart. Chapter 6. The Quill's Secret. The evening shadows lengthened across Willow Grange, cloaking the estate in a sombre hush as Hercule Poirot returned to the scene of Lionel Ashby's death. The study, with its heavy oak desk and shelves of well-worn books, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the scrutiny it was about to endure. Poirot, his small figure radiating purpose, moved with the precision of a watchmaker, his eyes scanning every detail of the room. Captain Hastings followed, his notebook at the ready, though he sensed that Poirot's true tools were the little grey cells he so often praised. The study was much as they had left it, save for the absence of Ashby's body, which had been removed for further examination by Dr. Haydock. The desk, however, remained untouched, a frozen tableau of the poet's final moments. Papers were scattered across its surface, some bearing the elegant scrawl of Ashby's hand, others crumpled as if discarded in frustration. A glass of port sat undisturbed, its ruby contents catching the lamplight. And at the centre of it all lay the quill, its crimson-stained nib glinting with a malevolent beauty. Poirot approached the desk, his gloved hands hovering over the quill without touching it. "This," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of reverence, is the heart of our mystery, mon ami. The quill, it is not merely a weapon. It is a symbol, a message from the killer to the victim. But what does it say? Hastings peered at the quill, its feather slightly bent, its nib etched with the faint initials L.A. "It's certainly unusual," he said. "Poisoned with aconite, you say? How could someone manage that without being caught?" Poirot's eyes gleamed as he lifted the quill with a pair of tweezers, holding it to the light. "Doctor, Haydock has confirmed the poison is aconite, a substance both swift and deadly. It was applied to the nib, likely through a hollowed chamber within it, designed to release the toxin when Monsieur Ashby pressed it to paper, or perhaps scratched his hand. The method, it is ingenious, Hastings. It required not only access to the quill, but knowledge of Ashby's habits, his insistence on using his own crafted quills." Hastings frowned, his mind grappling with the implications. "But who could have tampered with it? The study is private, isn't it? Only Ashby and the staff would come in here regularly." "Précisément," Poirot replied, his gaze sweeping the room. "And yet, our suspects, Crane, Vane, Blackwood, each had opportunity to visit Willow Grange. We must determine how the quill was poisoned and when. Let us examine the desk more closely." Poirot moved with methodical care, inspecting the papers first. Among them was a half-finished sonnet, its lines flowing with Ashby's characteristic flourish, but ending abruptly, as if the poet's inspiration had been cut short. Poirot read aloud, his voice soft. "The scribe with venom in his heart doth write, his quill a lance to pierce the poet's soul." He paused, his moustache twitching. "Curious, no? This scribe with venom. It suggests a target for Ashby's scorn. Perhaps our critic, Monsieur Crane." Hastings nodded eagerly. "That sounds like Crane, all right. He's got a venomous pen, and Ashby clearly didn't like him." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone cautious. "But we must not assume too quickly. The poem, it may point to another." He set the paper aside and turned his attention to a small wooden box on the desk, its surface carved with intricate floral patterns. It was locked, but the key lay nearby, glinting in the lamplight. Poirot opened the box, revealing a collection of quills, each meticulously crafted, their nibs sharpened to a fine point. "These are Ashby's tools," he said, lifting one to inspect it. "All bear his initials, all are identical to the one that killed him. Yet only one was poisoned. Why?" Hastings leaned closer. Could the killer have swapped one quill for another, replaced a safe one with the poisoned one? Poirot's eyes lit up. "An excellent thought, mon ami. But to do so, the killer would need access to this box, which Ashby kept locked, according to Mrs. Finch. We must learn who could have opened it, and when." He examined the lock, noting a faint scratch near the keyhole. "See here, Hastings," he said, pointing. "This mark, it is recent. Someone may have tampered with the lock, perhaps to gain access to the quills. We must have this box examined by an expert. There may be traces of the poisoner's hand." Poirot turned his attention to the desk's drawers, opening each with care. In one, he found a small vial of crimson ink, its label bearing the name of a London stationer. "This ink," he murmured, "it is the same colour as the stain on the quill. But is it merely ink, or something more sinister?" He set the vial aside for Dr. Haydock to analyse, then moved to the window, which overlooked the misty grounds of Willow Grange. The latch was secure, the glass unbroken, ruling out an intruder from outside. "The killer! They were inside this house," Poirot said, his voice firm. They knew Ashby's habits, his quills, his study. This is a crime of intimacy, Hastings, not of chance. Hastings scratched his head. But who? Crane was here the night before, Vane the afternoon before, and Blackwood that morning. Any of them could have slipped in here, couldn't they? Oui, Poirot agreed. But opportunity is not enough. The killer needed motive, means, and a moment unseen. We must speak again with Mrs. Finch. She knows the comings and goings of this house better than anyone. They left the study, Poirot carrying the quill in a silk handkerchief to preserve it for further examination. As they descended the staircase, the housekeeper appeared, her face pale and her hands twisting in apron. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "have you found anything? This house, it feels cursed." Poirot's smile was reassuring, though his eyes remained sharp. "Not cursed, Madame Finch, merely secretive. Tell me, this box of quills, did Monsieur Ashby allow anyone to touch it?" Mrs. Finch shook her head. "Never, sir. He was particular about his quills, kept them locked in that box and carried the key on him. Only I cleaned the study, and I never touched his desk without his say-so." "And in the days before his death," Poirot pressed, "did any of our visitors, Crane, Vane, or Blackwood, spend time alone in the study?" Mrs. Finch hesitated, her eyes darting to the side. "Well, sir, Mr. Crane was here 2 nights ago. He said he wanted to borrow a book, but he lingered by the desk while Mr. Ashby fetched it from the shelf. I thought nothing of it at the time." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Lingered, you say? And Miss Vane? Monsieur Blackwood?" "Miss Vane stayed in the parlour, far as I know," Mrs. Finch replied. "Mr. Blackwood was in the study this morning, but only briefly. Mr. Ashby was with him the whole time, signing that contract." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the information. "Merci, Madame Finch. You have been most helpful. We will speak again soon." As Mrs. Finch retreated, Hastings turned to Poirot, his eyes wide. "Crane lingering by the desk. That's suspicious, isn't it? He could have tampered with the quill then." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice low. "But we must not rush to judgment. The quill's secret lies not only in who touched it, but in why it was chosen. Tomorrow we shall verify the alibis of our suspects and test this ink. For now, mon ami, let us retire. The little grey cells, they need rest to work their magic." The study fell silent as Poirot and Hastings departed. The Crimson Quill left behind on the desk, a silent witness to the crime. Outside, the mist thickened, wrapping Willow Grange in a veil of mystery. But Poirot's mind was already cutting through the fog, inching closer to the truth. Chapter 7. A hidden clue. The morning air in St. Mary's Mead was crisp, with a faint bite of autumn that sharpened the senses. Hercule Poirot, clad in a neatly pressed suit and his ever-present overcoat, stood once more in Lionel Ashby's study at Willow Grange. The room, bathed in the pale light of a cloudy dawn, seemed to hold its secrets tightly. But Poirot's keen eyes were relentless in their search. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, clutched his notebook, his face a mixture of anticipation and puzzlement as he watched Poirot move with the precision of a conductor orchestrating a symphony. The study had been left undisturbed since their last visit, save for the removal of the poisoned quill, now in Dr. Haydock's care for further analysis. The oak desk, strewn with papers, and the half-finished sonnet remained a silent witness to Ashby's final moments. Poirot's attention, however, was drawn to the smallest details: the angle of a pen, the placement of a blotter, the faint dust on a shelf, as if each might whisper a clue to the killer's identity. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low but resonant, "we have learned much, yet the heart of this mystery eludes us. The quill, it was poisoned with aconite, a deliberate act by someone who knew Ashby's habits. But how was it done? And by whom? The answer, I believe, lies here, in this room." Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. "We've got Crane lingering by the desk, Vane arguing in the parlour, and Blackwood signing a contract. Any of them could have had a chance, but we need something solid. Poirot." "Précisément," Poirot replied, his moustache twitching. "And so, we search for the hidden clue, the one the killer didn't intend us to find." He began with the desk, his gloved hands moving with care to avoid disturbing potential evidence. The half-finished sonnet caught his eye again, its lines taunting in their incompleteness. "The scribe with venom in his heart doth write, his quill a lance to pierce the poet's soul." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he read, his mind turning over the words. "This scribe," he murmured, "it is a pointed reference, non? But to whom? Monsieur Crane, the critic, seems the obvious choice, yet poetry is often veiled in metaphor. We must look deeper." He set the sonnet aside and examined the desk's surface, noting a faint smudge of crimson ink near the blotter. It was not the neat stain of a careful writer, but a careless smear, as if something had been moved hastily. Poirot's fingers traced the edge of the blotter, lifting it gently. Beneath it, tucked into a crevice of the desk, was a crumpled piece of paper, its edges worn as if handled repeatedly. Poirot smoothed it out with care, revealing a letter written in a sharp, angular hand. He read aloud, his voice steady. "Ashby, your arrogance blinds you. Your fame is a house of cards, built on flattery and lies. My review was but the first gust of truth. Take care, lest your fall be abrupt. R. Crane." Hastings gasped. "Crane? That's practically a threat, Poirot. He must be the killer." Poirot's expression remained calm, his eyes fixed on the letter. "A threat, oui, but not proof, mon ami. This letter is months old. See the date, April of last year. It confirms Crane's grudge, but it does not place the poison in his hand. Yet why was it hidden here, beneath the blotter? Did Ashby keep it as a reminder, or did the killer place it to mislead us?" He folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket, his mind racing. "This letter, it is a clue, but not the only one. Let us continue." Poirot turned to the wooden box that had held Ashby's quills, its lock bearing the faint scratch he had noted the previous day. He opened it again, inspecting the remaining quills. Each was identical to the poisoned one, their nibs engraved with L.A. and sharpened to a fine point. "These quills," Poirot said, "are the work of a craftsman. Ashby took pride in them, as Madame Finch told us. But how did the killer choose the one to poison?" He closed the box and moved to the bookshelf, running a finger along the spines. A thin volume caught his eye, its cover slightly askew. He pulled it out, a collection of essays by Reginald Crane, titled The Critic's Blade. Inside, a page was marked with a folded slip of paper on which was written a single line in Ashby's hand. "The scribe's venom flows, but my quill shall answer." Poirot's moustache twitched, another reference to the scribe. This is no coincidence, Hastings. Ashby was planning a retaliation, perhaps in the form of that unfinished sonnet. But did Crane know of it? Hastings scratched his head. If Crane saw that poem, it might have pushed him over the edge. A public mockery like that would ruin his reputation. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone cautious. But we must consider all possibilities. The killer may have used this grudge to cast suspicion on Crane. Let us examine the ink. Poirot retrieved the vial of crimson ink from the desk, holding it to the light. Its rich hue matched the stain on the poisoned quill, but its label, a simple design from a London stationer, revealed little. "This ink," he said, "may hold the secret of the poison. If the aconite was mixed with it, the killer needed access to this vial. We must have it tested." He handed the vial to Hastings, who wrapped it carefully in a cloth. "And the glass of port?" Hastings asked, gesturing to the untouched drink on the desk. "Could the poison have been in that?" Poirot shook his head. "No, the port is untouched, and Dr. Haydock confirmed the poison entered through the quill, likely via a scratch or prolonged contact. The glass, it is a distraction. Nothing more." Poirot stepped back, his eyes sweeping the room once more. "This study, it is a stage, Hastings. The killer chose it deliberately, knowing Ashby would be alone, right in with his cherished quill. But the clue we seek, it is not only in what we see, but in what is missing." He knelt by the desk, peering beneath it. His fingers brushed against something small and metallic, lodged in a crack in the floorboards. With a delicate motion, he extracted a tiny silver key, its surface etched with the same floral pattern as the quill box. "Voila," he said, holding it up. "A second key to the quill box. Ashby kept one on his person, according to Madame Finch. So why is this one here? Hidden?" Hastings's eyes widened. "The killer used it to open the box and tamper with the quill." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice low. "Or it was left to mislead us. We must learn who had access to this key, and when it was last used." He pocketed the key and turned to Hastings. "The letter, the poem, the key, these are pieces of the puzzle, mon ami, but they do not yet form a picture. We must speak again with Madame Finch, and we must verify the movements of our suspects. The killer, they are clever, but they have made a mistake. And Hercule Poirot, he does not overlook mistakes." As they left the study, the clouds outside parted briefly, casting a shaft of light across the desk. The scattered papers seemed to whisper Ashby's final thoughts, but the Crimson Quill was silent, its secret locked within its deadly nib. Poirot, his mind a whirl of possibilities, was determined to unlock it, one clue at a time. Chapter 8. The alibis unravel. The clock in the hall of Willow Grange struck noon, its sombre chimes echoing through the house as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings prepared to unravel the threads of the suspects' alibis. The morning had been spent in meticulous investigation, and Poirot's mind was a crucible, refining each clue into a sharper understanding of Lionel Ashby's murder. The study, with its crimson quill and hidden key, had yielded secrets, but the truth remained elusive. Now, in the quiet of the library, Poirot stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man closing in on his quarry. Hastings, ever the diligent assistant, had returned from a morning of inquiries in St. Mary's Mead, his notebook filled with notes from conversations with villagers and staff. He sat at a polished mahogany table, his face flushed with the exertion of his task. "I've checked their stories as best I could, Poirot," he said, flipping through his notes, "but I'm not sure we're any closer to pinning it down." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his amusement at Hastings' impatience. "Patience, mon ami. The truth, It is like a fine wine. It requires time to breathe. Tell me, what have you learned of our suspect's movements?" Hastings cleared his throat, consulting his notes. "Let's start with Reginald Crane. He claims he was at the Red Lion Inn by 9:30 the night before Ashby's death, drinking with the locals. I spoke to Molly, the barmaid. She confirms he was there, but she says he arrived closer to 10 and left by 11. She noticed he seemed agitated, kept checking his watch. That gives him a window of at least an hour after leaving Willow Grange at 9. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "An hour, you say? Time enough to return to the study, perhaps, and tamper with the quill. But we must be precise. Did anyone see him leave the inn?" Hastings shook his head. "Not that Molly could say. The inn was busy, and she was tending the bar. Crane could have slipped out and back without notice." "Très intéressant," Poirot murmured. "Monsieur Crane's alibi. It is not as solid as he would have us believe." "And Mademoiselle Vane?" Hastings turned a page. "Clara Vane says she was home at Rose Cottage by 4 o'clock the afternoon before the murder, after her argument with Ashby. Her maid, Ellen, confirms she was there, preparing tea around 4:30. But here's the thing. Rose Cottage is just across the meadow from Willow Grange. You can see the estate from her study window. I checked myself. It's a clear view. She could have slipped back to Willow Grange in minutes, unnoticed." Poirot's fingers tapped rhythmically on the table. "A clear view, and a short distance. Mademoiselle Vane, she has the opportunity. But did she have the means? The quill? It was locked in Ashby's box. We must learn if she had access to that second key we found." Hastings nodded, scribbling a note. "And then there's Blackwood. He says he was on the 11 o'clock train to London after visiting Ashby that morning. I spoke to the station master at St. Mary's Mead. He remembers Blackwood buying a ticket, but he boarded the 10 o'clock train, not the 11. Blackwood was in London by 11:30, according to his clerk Thompson. That means he left Willow Grange earlier than he claimed, probably by 9:30. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A discrepancy, mon ami. Monsieur Blackwood, he wishes us to believe he lingered with Ashby, but he was gone earlier. Why lie about such a thing, unless to conceal his actions? Did the station master note anything else?" "He said Blackwood seemed in a hurry," Hastings replied, "carrying a briefcase, looking over his shoulder as if worried someone was watching." Poirot leaned back, his mind weaving the new information into the tapestry of the case. "Each alibi, it is like a house of cards, Hastings, a gentle push, and it trembles. Crane, he has an hour unaccounted for. Vane, she is close enough to strike and return unseen. Blackwood, he misleads us about his departure. But the quill, always we return to the quill. It was poisoned with aconite, placed in Ashby's box, and used by him alone. The killer, they knew this, and they planned with care." Hastings frowned. "But how do we narrow it down? They all had motive. Crane's grudge, Vane's ambition, Blackwood's greed. And they all had a chance to get to that quill." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "We narrow it down, mon ami, by finding the mistake. The killer, they are clever, but no one is perfect. The letter from Crane, hidden beneath the blotter, suggests his guilt, but it is too convenient, non? The key we found, it points to access, but who left it? And the ink, has Dr. Haydock reported on the vial?" Hastings shook his head. "Not yet. He's still testing it. But he did say the aconite on the quill was pure, not diluted. It would have acted in minutes, probably through a scratch while Ashby was writing. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Then we must consider the timing. Ashby was found at 6, dead for perhaps an hour. He was writing alone in the late afternoon. The killer, they ensured the poisoned quill was in his hand during that time. We must reconstruct the hours before his death. He paced the library, his steps measured, his eyes distant. Crane was here 2 nights ago, lingering by the desk. Vane was here the afternoon before, in the parlour, but close to the study. Blackwood was here that morning, in the study itself. Each could have tampered with the quill, but only one had the perfect moment. Hastings looked up from his notes. What about the staff? Could someone else have slipped in? A maid, a gardener. Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings. Madame Finch is loyal, and the other staff were accounted for by Inspector Grayson. The killer is one of our 3. The quill, it was a personal act, a strike at Ashby's heart. We must look closer at their interactions with him. He stopped pacing, his gaze falling on a portrait of Ashby above the fireplace, a proud, handsome man with a quill in hand, his eyes alight with creative fire. Ashby. He was a man who inspired both admiration and envy. His sonnet, his letter, his quills, they tell a story of conflict. We must find the thread that ties them to the killer. Hastings closed his notebook, his expression determined. What's our next step, Poirot? Poirot's eyes twinkled. We return to the study, mon ami, to search for what we have missed, and we speak again with Madame Finch. She sees more than she knows. Then we confront our suspects with their discrepancies. The truth, it will emerge when they are pressed. As they left the library, the clouds outside thickened, casting Willow Grange in a grey pallor. The house seemed to hold its breath, its secrets buried deep within its walls. But Poirot, with his unerring instinct, was closing in, the Crimson Quill guiding him like a beacon toward the heart of the mystery. Chapter 9. The poet's last words. The late afternoon light in St. Mary's Mead had softened, bathing Willow Grange in a muted glow that seemed to deepen the sombre mood within its walls. Hercule Poirot, his small frame, a study en or, precision and purpose, stood once more in the grand hall, where the air carried the faint scent of polished wood and fading roses. The investigation into Lionel Ashby's murder had reached a critical juncture, and Poirot's mind, like a finely tuned instrument, was attuned to the subtlest notes of truth. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood at his side, his face etched with the strain of their relentless pursuit of answers. The study had revealed its secrets, the hidden letter, the second key, the unfinished sonnet. But Poirot knew that the key to unraveling the mystery lay not only in physical clues, but in the human heart. The housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, with her intimate knowledge of Willow Grange's rhythms, was the next piece of the puzzle. Poirot had requested her presence in the morning room, a quiet space with pale green walls and a single window overlooking the misty lawn. As they waited, Poirot's eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man who sensed the truth drawing near. "Mon ami," Poirot said, adjusting his cufflinks with a precise flick. "Madame Finch is the eyes and ears of this house. She sees what others do not, and her memory, it may hold the detail that unlocks this case. We must listen carefully, for the poet's last words, they were not only those written on paper." Hastings nodded, his notebook open. "She seemed nervous yesterday, Poirot. Do you think she's holding something back?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his voice low, "but not out of guilt. Fear, perhaps, or loyalty to her master. We shall see. Mrs. Finch entered, her stout figure clad in a plain grey dress, her hands clasped tightly before her. Her eyes, red-rimmed from sleeplessness or sorrow, darted between Poirot and Hastings. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Oui, Madame Finch," Poirot said, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit. You have been most helpful, but there is more we must know. Monsieur Ashby's death, it was no accident, and you, as the guardian of this house, may have seen or heard something vital. Tell me, what was his routine in the days before his death?" Mrs. Finch settled into the chair, her hands smoothing her apron, as if seeking comfort in the familiar motion. "Mr. Ashby was a creature of habit, sir. He'd spend his mornings in the study, writing or reading, always with one of his special quills. He'd make them himself, you know, from goose feathers he'd order from a shop in London. Kept them in that locked box, and he'd never let anyone touch them. Not even me when I dusted." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his interest. "And this box, it was always locked. He carried the key, you said?" "Yes, sir," Mrs. Finch replied. "He wore it on a chain around his neck, never took it off except to bathe. I'd see him unlock the box each morning, choose a quill, and set to work. He was particular about it, said it was part of his craft." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. "And in the days before his death, did anyone have access to this box? You mentioned Monsieur Crane lingering by the desk 2 nights ago. Did you see him touch it?" Mrs. Finch's brow furrowed, and she hesitated, as if weighing her words. I don't think so, sir. Mr. Crane was in the study, yes, while Mr. Ashby fetched a book from the shelf. I was passing by with a tray of tea and saw him standing near the desk. His hand was on it, but I didn't see him open the box. Mr. Ashby was back in a moment, and they left for the parlour." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "His hand was on the desk, you say? And the box was there. This is most interesting. And what of Mademoiselle Vane, or Monsieur Blackwood? Did they ever approach the study?" Mrs. Finch shook her head. "Miss Vane stayed in the parlour when she came yesterday afternoon. I brought them tea, and they were arguing something fierce, but she never went near the study. Mr. Blackwood was in there with Mr. Ashby yesterday morning, signing that contract, but Mr. Ashby was with him the whole time. I saw them through the door. Mr. Ashby was at his desk, and Mr. Blackwood stood by the fireplace." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing every detail. "And tell me, Madame Finch, did Monsieur Ashby seem troubled in his final days? Did he speak of his visitors, or of any threats?" Mrs. Finch's hands twisted in her lap. "He was out of sorts, sir. Kept muttering about venomous scribes and false friends. I heard him say something to himself about a poem he was writing, something that would set the record straight. He was in the study late the night before he died, writing by lamplight. I thought he was just caught up in his work, but now—" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "A poem to set the record straight, you say? Did you see this poem, or hear more of it?" "No, sir," Mrs. Finch replied. "He was private about his drafts, but I found a scrap of paper in the waste-basket when I cleaned the study that morning. Before he died, mind you. It had a line about a scribe and a quill of truth. I didn't think much of it, just tossed it out." Poirot's moustache quivered. "A pity, Madame Finch, that you did not keep it. But no matter. This poem, it is the one we found, unfinished, on his desk. It speaks of a scribe with venom. Tell me, Did Monsieur Ashby ever mention Monsieur Crane, Mademoiselle Vane, or Monsieur Blackwood by name in connection with his troubles? Mrs. Finch hesitated, her eyes darting to the window. Not by name, sir, but he did say something odd about Mr. Crane after he left 2 nights ago. He said, "That man's pen is dipped in poison, but mine will cut deeper." I thought he meant his writing. Not real poison. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Merci, Madame Finch. You have given us much to consider. One final question. This second key we found, hidden beneath the desk, did you ever see another key to the quill box? Mrs. Finch's eyes widened. No, sir. Mr. Ashby only ever had the one, far as I knew. A second key? That's strange, sir. He never mentioned it. Poirot dismissed her with a nod, his expression thoughtful. You have been most helpful, madame. We will speak again if needed. As Mrs. Finch left, her footsteps soft on the carpet, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice eager. That's damning for Crane, isn't it? Lingering by the desk, Ashby's talk of a venomous scribe. It all points to him. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. It points, oui, but too clearly, perhaps. The killer, they are clever, Hastings. They may wish us to focus on Crane while the true culprit slips away. The second key, the poem, the ink, these are pieces of a puzzle, but we must fit them correctly. Hastings frowned. And the alibis. They're all shaky. Crane's hour unaccounted for. Vane's cottage so close. Blackwood's early train. How do we narrow it down? Poirot's eyes twinkled. By pressing, mon ami. We confront our suspects with what we know, and we watch their reactions. The killer, they will betray themselves, if only by a glance, a word, and we await Dr. Haydock's report on the ink. If it contains aconite, it will tell us how the poison was delivered. He rose, adjusting his coat. For now, we return to the study. There is more to find, I am certain. The poet's last words. They speak not only of his art, but of his enemy. And that enemy, Hastings, is closer than we think. The morning room fell silent as Poirot and Hastings departed, the weight of their discoveries settling like dust. Outside, the clouds gathered, casting Willow Grange in a deepening shadow. But Poirot's mind burned bright, inching ever closer to the truth behind the Crimson Quill. Chapter 10. The Confrontation. The drawing-room of Willow Grange was steeped in an atmosphere of taut anticipation, its heavy velvet drapes absorbing the fading light of the late afternoon. The fire in the hearth crackled fitfully, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the 3 suspects gathered at Hercule Poirot's command. Reginald Crane sat stiffly, his thin frame rigid with indignation. Clara Vane's expressive eyes burned with defiance, and Percival Blackwood, his florid cheeks glistening with a sheen of nervous perspiration, clutched his gold watch chain as if it were a lifeline. Captain Hastings stood near the door, his notebook tucked away, his gaze shifting between the suspects and Poirot, whose diminutive figure commanded the room with an authority that belied his stature. Poirot stood at the center, his hands clasped behind his back, his moustache immaculate, his eyes gleaming with the clarity of a man who had glimpsed the truth. The investigation into Lionel Ashby's murder had woven a complex web of motives, opportunities, and clues: the Crimson Quill, the hidden letter, the second key, the unfinished sonnet. But now, Poirot was ready to pull the threads together and expose the killer. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice soft yet resonant, carrying the weight of inevitability, We are gathered to uncover the truth behind the death of Monsieur Lionel Ashby, struck down in his study by a quill laced with aconite. This was no accident, none, but a murder most deliberate, planned with care, and executed with precision. Each of you had reason to wish him harm, and each of you had opportunity. But only one of you turned the poet's own tool, his cherished quill, into an instrument of death. A murmur of protest rose from the group, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. Let us proceed with order and method. I will lay before you the facts, and we shall see where they lead. He turned first to Reginald Crane, whose sharp eyes narrowed under Poirot's scrutiny. Monsieur Crane, you are a critic whose words have shaped reputations. 2 years ago, your review in the Literary Gazette cost Monsieur Ashby the Laurel Award, a blow to his pride. He retaliated with insults, calling you a petty scribbler in public, and, we now know, in a poem that mocked a venomous scribe. You visited Willow Grange 2 nights ago, lingering by his desk while he fetched a book. A letter, hidden beneath his blotter, reveals your lingering resentment. A threat, perhaps, to end his fame abruptly. Crane's face flushed, his voice sharp. That letter was months old. I wrote it in anger, yes, but I didn't kill him. I was at the Red Lion Inn by 10 that night, as I told you. Ask Molly. Poirot's moustache twitched. Indeed, the barmaid confirms your presence, but not until 10, leaving an hour unaccounted for after you left Willow Grange at 9. Time enough, perhaps, to tamper with the quill in its locked box, and we have found a second key, hidden beneath the desk. A key that could have granted you access. Crane's hands clenched, but he said nothing, his silence louder than any protest. Poirot turned to Clara Vane, whose auburn hair seemed to catch fire in the hearth's glow. Mademoiselle Vane, your ambition burned brightly, yet you lived in Monsieur Ashby's shadow. His fame, his success, they overshadowed your own revolutionary work. You argued with him the afternoon before his death, in the parlour, over his mockery of your latest collection. Your cottage, it is but a short walk across the meadow, with a clear view of Willow Grange. You could have returned, unseen, to the study. Clara's eyes flashed with indignation. I told you I was home by 4, and my maid, Ellen, saw me there. I despised Ashby's arrogance, but I didn't need to kill him. My poems will outlast his. That's my victory. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Your alibi, it is supported by your maid, but the proximity of your cottage, it is convenient. And your passion, mademoiselle, it is a fire that could burn brightly enough to consume an enemy. Finally, Poirot faced Percival Blackwood, whose nervous tic had grown more pronounced. Monsieur Blackwood, you profited greatly from Monsieur Ashby's work, yet his demands for higher advances strained your relationship. You visited him the morning of his death, signing a contract that promised wealth. But his death, it promises even more. Posthumous works sell, do they not? And yet, you lied about your departure, claiming the 11 o'clock train when you took the 10 o'clock, leaving Willow Grange earlier than you admitted. Blackwood's handkerchief made a frantic pass across his brow. A mistake, that's all. I was in London by noon. My clerk can confirm it. I had no reason to kill Ashby. His books were my livelihood. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A livelihood, oui, but one that grew more lucrative with his death. You were in the study that morning, near the desk where the quill lay. Did you see the box, perhaps, or the key? I saw nothing, Blackwood protested. I stayed by the fireplace, as I told you. Ashby signed the contract, and I left." Poirot stepped back, his gaze sweeping the room. 3 suspects, 3 motives, 3 opportunities. But the quill, it tells us more. It was poisoned with aconite, applied to the nib, which was hollowed to hold the toxin. Only someone who knew Ashby's habit of using his custom quills could ensure his death. The second key, found beneath the desk, suggests access to the locked box. The letter from Monsieur Crane, hidden beneath the blotter, points to his grudge. The unfinished sonnet, with its talk of a venomous scribe, seems to accuse him further. Yet I, Hercule Poirot, see beyond the obvious. He paused, letting the tension build. Monsieur Crane, your resentment is clear, and your presence by the desk is damning. But the letter, it is too neatly placed, as if meant to be found. Mademoiselle Varne, your ambition drives you, but your argument was in the parlour, and the quill's method is too subtle for your fiery nature. Monsieur Blackwood, your greed is evident, and your lie about the train raises questions. But your time in the study was brief, under Ashby's watchful eye. Poirot's voice grew sharper. The killer. They made a mistake. The second key, it was not meant to be found. It was dropped, perhaps, in haste. And the ink, Dr. Haydock's report, which I received this morning, confirms no aconite in the vial. The poison was applied directly to the quill's nib, a task requiring precision and access. He turned to Crane, his eyes like twin blades. Monsieur Crane, you were seen by Madame Finch, your hand on the desk near the quill box. You knew Ashby's habits, his pride in his quills. Your letter, your poem's target. Did you not seek to silence him before he could mock you further? Crane leapt to his feet, his face pale. This is absurd. I didn't touch the quill. Poirot raised a hand, cutting him off. We shall see, monsieur. The truth, it is close. Tomorrow we will test the key for traces of the poisoner's hand. For now, reflect on your actions. As the suspects filed out, Clara's head held high, Blackwood muttering and Crane silent. Hastings turned to Poirot. You're zeroing in on Crane, aren't you? That key, the letter, it's all pointing to him. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The clues, they point, oui. But the heart of the killer, it hides. We are close, mon ami, but we must be certain. The Crimson Quill, it will speak its final truth soon. The drawing room fell silent, the fire's embers glowing faintly. Outside, the mist gathered once more, shrouding Willow Grange in mystery. But Poirot's mind was a beacon, cutting through the fog toward the killer's identity. Chapter 11. The Final Piece. The morning mist had lifted from St. Mary's Mead, leaving the grounds of Willow Grange bathed in a crisp, pale light that seemed to sharpen the edges of the unfolding drama. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his small figure radiating an air of quiet triumph, as if the puzzle of Lionel Ashby's murder was finally yielding to his relentless scrutiny. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, shifted restlessly, his notebook tucked under his arm, his eyes reflecting both anticipation and a touch of bewilderment. The Crimson Quill, with its deadly secret, had drawn them closer to the truth, and Poirot was poised to reveal the final piece of the intricate mosaic. The previous day's confrontation had left the suspects shaken, their alibis frayed, and their motives laid bare. Reginald Crane's lingering grudge, Clara Vane's burning ambition, and Percival Blackwood's veiled greed had each been probed. But it was the physical evidence, the second key, the hidden letter, the poisoned quill, that had set Poirot's mind alight. Now he had summoned Inspector Grayson and Dr. Haydock to the library, along with the suspects, for a final reckoning. The room, with its towering shelves and the faint scent of old leather, seemed an apt stage for the denouement. As the group assembled, Poirot stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his moustache impeccably groomed. Crane sat rigidly, his thin lips pressed into a line. Vane's eyes flickered with defiance, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Blackwood fidgeted, his handkerchief a crumpled ruin. Inspector Grayson, a sturdy man with a skeptical air, stood near the door, while Dr. Haydock, his medical bag at his side, watched with quiet interest. Hastings, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained silent, his gaze fixed on Poirot. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding, "we are gathered to unmask the murderer of Monsieur Lionel Ashby, killed by a quill laced with aconite in his own study. This was a crime of precision, of intimacy, planned by one who knew the poet's habits and turned his cherished tool into a weapon. I, Hercule Poirot, have examined the clues, tested the alibis, and listened to the whispers of truth. Now we shall see the final piece fall into place." He paused, letting the tension build, his eyes sweeping the room. "Let us review the facts. The quill, engraved with Ashby's initials, was poisoned with aconite applied to its hollowed nib. The poison entered through a scratch or prolonged contact, killing him within minutes, as he wrote in the late afternoon. The quill was kept in a locked box, to which Ashby held the only known key, until we found a second hidden beneath the desk. A letter from Monsieur Crane, threatening Ashby's fame, was found beneath the blotter. An unfinished sonnet spoke of a venomous scribe. These clues, they point, but they also mislead." Crane stirred, his voice sharp. "If you're accusing me, Poirot, you're mistaken. I've told you everything." Poirot raised a hand, his gaze steady. "Patience, Monsieur Crane. We shall come to you. First, let us consider the alibis which have begun to unravel. You, monsieur, left Willow Grange at 9 the night before the murder, but did not reach the Red Lion Inn until 10, leaving an hour unaccounted for. Mademoiselle Vane, you were home by 4 after your argument with Ashby, but your cottage's proximity to Willow Grange allowed you to return unseen. Monsieur Blackwood, you claimed to take the 11 o'clock train to London, but boarded the 10 o'clock, leaving earlier than stated." Blackwood sputtered, "It was a mistake, I tell you." "I meant no harm." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A mistake, perhaps, but every detail matters. Now let us turn to the quill. Dr. Haydock, you have examined it further. What have you found?" Dr. Haydock cleared his throat, producing a small envelope. The quill's nib was indeed hollowed, a clever modification to hold the aconite. I found traces of the poison embedded in the metal, applied with precision. The ink vial, however, was clean. No aconite. The poison was placed directly on the quill, likely within hours of Ashby's death, as aconite degrades quickly. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "Merci, Doctor. This tells us the killer acted close to the time of death, perhaps that morning or the night before. The second key. It is the key. Pardon the pun. To our solution. Inspector Grayson, you have examined it for fingerprints?" Grayson stepped forward, his expression grim. "Yes, Mr. Poirot. We found a single clear print on the key, belonging to Mr. Crane." A gasp rippled through the room. Crane leapt to his feet, his face ashen. "That's impossible. I never touched that key." Poirot's voice cut through the protest, calm but unyielding. "Sit, Monsieur Crane. The fingerprint, it is damning. But let us consider the whole. The letter beneath the blotter, your presence by the desk 2 nights ago, as seen by Madame Finch. The sonnet's reference to a venomous scribe, all point to you. But I, Hercule Poirot, see further. The letter, it was too conveniently placed, as if meant to be found. The sonnet, it was unfinished, perhaps a decoy. The killer wished us to suspect you, monsieur, but they overplayed their hand." He turned to the group, his voice rising. "The quill was poisoned by one who knew Ashby's habits intimately. Madame Finch told us he crafted his quills himself, kept them locked, and used them daily. The second key, it was not Ashby's, it was made by the killer, who needed access to the box. But how did they obtain it? And why leave it behind?" Poirot's gaze settled on Crane. "Monsieur Crane, your grudge was real. Ashby humiliated you, first with his letter, then with his public insults, and finally with that sonnet, which you learned of during your visit. You were seen by the desk where the quill box stood. The key, it bears your print. And the aconite, Dr. Haydock confirms it is a poison easily obtained by one with literary connections, as it is used in certain inks. You coated the quill's nib, knowing Ashby would use it the next day." Crane's face crumpled, his voice breaking. I couldn't stand it anymore. His poem, it mocked me, called me a scribe with venom. He read a draft to me that night, laughing, saying it would ruin me. I'd lost everything because of him. My credibility, my pride. I got the aconite from a chemist in London, mixed it into a paste, and coated the quill when he stepped away. I just wanted him silenced." The room fell silent, the weight of the confession settling like dust. Vane's eyes widened, Blackwood's jaw dropped, and Hastings stared, his earlier suspicions confirmed. Inspector Grayson stepped forward, his handcuffs ready. Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "You chose a poet's weapon, Monsieur Crane, but in doing so, you betrayed yourself. The key, you dropped it in haste. The letter, you placed it to taunt him, not expecting it to be found so soon. Your pride, it was your undoing." As Grayson led Crane away, Poirot turned to Hastings, his eyes thoughtful. "The human heart, mon ami, it is a fragile thing. A wound to pride can drive a man to murder, but it also leaves a trail. The Crimson Quill, it spoke the truth." The library emptied, leaving only Poirot and Hastings. The fire burned low, and outside the light faded, but the mystery of Willow Grange was resolved, its secrets laid bare by the brilliance of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 12. The Resolution. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a gentle twilight over St. Mary's Mead, its golden hues softening the austere silhouette of Willow Grange. The house, once heavy with the weight of murder, seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot. The grand hall, where the final confrontation had unfolded, was now quiet, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock and the occasional creak of the settling timbers. Poirot stood by a tall window, his small figure framed against the fading light, his moustache immaculate, his eyes reflecting a quiet satisfaction. Captain Hastings, seated on a velvet-upholstered chair, watched his friend with a mixture of awe and relief. The resolution of Lionel Ashby's murder settling like the last note of a sombre symphony. The confession of Reginald Crane had brought the case to a close, his admission of guilt unravelling the mystery of the Crimson Quill. Yet, as was Poirot's custom, there remained a final act: to tie the threads of the investigation into a coherent narrative, ensuring no question lingered unanswered. Inspector Grayson had taken Crane into custody, and Clara Vane and Percival Blackwood had departed, their faces etched with shock, but also a strange relief, as if the shadow of suspicion had been lifted from their shoulders. Poirot turned from the window, his hands clasped behind his back, and addressed Hastings with a gentle smile. "Mon ami, the case of the Crimson Quill, it is complete. But you, I see, have questions still. Come, let us walk through the truth together, so that the little grey cells may rest." Hastings leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "I understand Crane did it, Poirot, but it all seems so theatrical. Why the quill? Why not a simpler method, like poison in his port?" Poirot's eyes twinkled, a sign of his pleasure in explaining the intricacies of human nature. "The quill, Hastings, it was not chosen by chance. It was a symbol, a weapon as poetic as the victim himself. Monsieur Crane, he was a man of words, a critic whose pen had wounded Ashby's pride. But Ashby, he struck back with his own words, first in public insults, then in that unfinished sonnet that mocked Crane as a venomous scribe. This poem, it was the final blow to Crane's pride, a wound too deep to bear." Poirot paced slowly, his voice measured. Crane, he could not challenge Ashby's fame directly, for the poet was beloved. So he chose a method that mirrored Ashby's art. The quill, engraved with Ashby's initials, was the poet's pride, his tool of creation. By poisoning it with aconite, Crane turned Ashby's strength against him, ensuring his death would be as dramatic as his life. It was an act of vengeance, but also of envy, a critic who longed to wield the power of a poet. Hastings nodded, his earlier confusion giving way to clarity. "And the second key? How did he get it?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "The key. It was Crane's masterstroke, yet also his mistake. Ashby, as Madame Finch told us, kept the only key to his quill box on a chain about his neck. But Crane, during one of his visits, likely months ago, when their feud was at its height, must have observed Ashby's habits closely. I suspect he had a duplicate made, perhaps by a discreet locksmith in London, using a moment when Ashby was distracted, a qualm. Scratch on the lock. It suggests a key not perfectly fitted, used in haste." He paused, his gaze distant. "On the night before the murder, Crane lingered by the desk, as Madame Finch saw. Ashby was fetching a book, giving Crane a moment to unlock the box and coat the quill's nib with aconite, prepared in advance as a paste to adhere to the hollowed metal. He replaced the quill, locked the box, but in his haste he dropped the second key, where it lodged beneath the desk. This, mon ami, was the mistake that betrayed him." Hastings' eyes widened. "And the fingerprint on the key. It was the final nail in his coffin." "Oui," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm. "The fingerprint, it confirmed what the clues suggested. The letter beneath the blotter, threatening Ashby's fame, was meant to taunt the poet, perhaps to goad him into using the quill that night. But Ashby he did not write until the next day. And so the letter remained, a clue too obvious, yet not false. The sonnet, with its venomous scribe, was Ashby's final act of defiance, but it sealed his fate by pushing Crane to act." Hastings shook his head, marveling. "It's diabolical, Poirot. To use Ashby's own quill against him, it's like something out of one of his poems." Poirot's smile was tinged with sadness. "The human heart, mon ami. It is a complex thing. Pride, when wounded, can drive a man to create beauty or to destroy it. Crane, He could not bear to be mocked by the poet he envied. His pride, it turned his pen into a weapon, just as Ashby's quill became his doom. The hall fell silent, the clocks ticking a gentle reminder of time's passage. Outside, the village of St. Mary's Mead returned to its quiet routine, the gossip of Ashby's death already fading into the rhythm of daily life. But the tale of the Crimson Quill would linger, a testament to the brilliance of Hercule Poirot, who had seen through the layers of deception to the truth beneath. Poirot adjusted his coat, his expression serene. "Come, Hastings, let us leave Willow Grange to its ghosts. The case, it is closed, and we have earned our rest." As they stepped into the cool evening air, the mist parted, revealing a sky streaked with the last colors of dusk. Poirot paused, his eyes on the horizon, and murmured, "The poet is gone, but his words, they live on, and so too does justice." With that, the two men walked down the gravel path, leaving Willow Grange behind, its secrets resolved, its tragedy laid to rest by the unerring mind of Hercule Poirot.